So I'm Odie Bishard, and I'm a lecturer of psychology at the Department of Social Sciences at BCC. I'm also a graduate of this wonderful institution, and I'm an entirely CUNY educated kid. I went from BCC to Lehman to the CUNY Graduate Center, and I'm putting the finishing touches on my dissertation right now. I think, like Antonio, I completely over-prepared and thought that we would have more time. Sometimes prezies make folks feel dizzy. So I hope that my obsessive clicking will help you both very vertigo. Christopher, Jeanette, Nicole, Alberto, Caesar are students of mine in an intermediate level social psychology class. So we're going to talk about how I learned how to do podcasting in a summer faculty development workshop. And I turned around and taught all those skills to my students for them to produce their own student lectures on rather advanced social psychological concepts. So, and really outside of the textbook. So we used Kimberly Dusk in social psychology, but Alberto and Christopher will talk about reading Ignacio Martín Baró, who was an El Salvadorian critical social psychologist, and Jeanette will talk about rereading decolonial critiques of methodology, and she'll do her podcast on Miguel Echeniza. Okay, so I feel like as a faculty member and maybe as a like I said, an alumni of the school, that I have a weird relationship to this institution, and I'm constantly bombarded with statistics about what BCC students can't do. In all of CUNY, we have the worst graduation rate. We have the worst transfer rate. We have the worst retention rate, too, right? And it's interesting how graduation and retention looks differently in different ethnic culture groups of students and across different genders. I feel like a lot of my students have developed a sense of learned helplessness, and sometimes graduation feels like it's impossible. And at the same time, on our campus at least, there's a huge culture of like assessment. You can assess everything, right? And we've all had to learn Bloom's wonderful taxonomy. And I think as an educator, I struggle with I know I do the remembering, understanding, applying thing really well. I think I scaffold that in my classroom really well, but I really want to get my students to the top of the pyramid, right, where they're creating. Cool. But at the same time, I know that when I talk, that they remember this much of what I said, and that performance and then embodiment of the work is where I get them to fully comprehend and take into their bodies the stuff that I'm trying to teach. So I see myself largely as a bridge, or I was prepared to talk about from Gloria Anzell doing theory at Ivana, but I don't have time. So I'll go over there. Okay. So for me, it was really important for my pedagogy to be culturally relevant, for it to be engaged, for it to use lots of technology. I wish I had time to show that video. So Nepantla really quickly is an Aztec word, it's a Nahuatl word that means in between space, and Nepanleras are conceptualized by Anzell as cultural border crossers, like people who are skilled at building bridges between identities and communities and spaces that are sometimes antagonistic. So I feel like as a faculty member, as a former student, as a graduate student, as a tenured professor, there's a lot of dissociative identity in my body, right? And so being an Nepantla for me is about trying to resolve a lot of those discontinuities, if that makes sense. Cool. So I started off, and I've been teaching at BCC a long time, I think 14 years maybe. I've been everything from an adjunct to a substitute lecturer to an instructor, and now to a lecturer with a CCE. I started off with having my students do 5-minute lectures using PowerPoint. And then I shifted to learning communities, and I kind of had the same experience that you did. I didn't want to see see students working individually. I don't want to see them learning by osmosis, right? And so I started using digital storytelling, and that was successful for a while. And I played around with different technologies in the classroom. I laughed when I started teaching here, when we used to, remember we used to use transparencies, right? So I went from transparencies to PowerPoint to Prezi to shifting towards using podcasts. All right, and really quickly, I really embraced Vygotsky notions of the zone of possible development, that when you set the bar high, when you assist students in cultivating particular skills, they can do anything. Okay. So for us, I think what this showcase is about is theorizing back. And Jeanette will talk a little bit about theorizing back, which is this notion that there are enough deficit pathological representations about BCC students, right, students of color. So we're going to theorize back with resilience, right? We're going to theorize back with more complicated conceptualizations of who we are and the kind of things that we go through. And I would love to talk some more, but I'm going to let Jeanette and Christopher take over. So you were here. Who wants to go first? Yeah. So they didn't want me to play their podcast, so they want to do a live presentation.
Hi, my name is Christopher Polidoro. I'm one of Monique Gashard's students for Psych 22, Social Psychology, and I'm going to be talking about Writings for Liberation Psychology by Ignacio Martín-Baró, who cultivated the skills of psychologists in Latin America, especially in El Salvador. He begins with talking about the slavery of Latin American psychology, what's holding it back. He talks about how Latin American psychology hasn't really existed for that long, and that's one of the things that's keeping it down to a sense. It hasn't been around that long, so how can you cultivate what you're learning? Also, they depend on foreign theologies without you coming to a sense of their own in terms of theology. Also, they may be studying concepts, but they're not truly applying it to what is needed for them. Then he begins with many things of what's wrong with Latin American psychology, and one of the things he talks about is scientistic mimicry. The term itself is kind of self-defines itself. Also, in scientistic mimicry, he talks about, can psychologists from Latin America truly understand what they're doing if they just borrow it from, say, the United States, who kind of gets like this big brother type of, they get looked up to because that's what they wanted to do. Also, they take from North American concepts in order to gain similar social status, because they're in such a rush to feel that they just want to get accepted and truly apply this thing, so they're in a rush, and that's what they wanted to do. Also, an example of this would be a Latin American psychologist would switch from behaviorism to cognitive psychology just as the US does. Well, maybe a Latin American psychologist in Latin America, they benefit from behaviorism and not cognitive psychology, but they don't have a chance to really apply that concept. He also gives a brief background on the beginnings of North American psychology as a way of kind of connecting the two, Latin American and North American psychology. He says that North American psychologists ran so fast after scientific recognition and social status that it kind of stumbled. Also, he says that North America took methods from natural sciences of early 20th century in order for it to be seen as a legitimate science. Kind of the same thing of what Latin American psychologists are doing today. Also, he feels that North American psychologists lost sight of its original meaning in order to please the real scientists. We all know how psychology was developed and how the history of psychology, and kind of, they wanted to reach that same tangible science as biologists or things like that. So if North American psychologists are doing that, how is it going to work for Latin American psychology? And it leads me to say, if North American psychology's origins took methods and practices of real sciences, then how can Latin American psychologists do the same? A little example I kind of gave, just, this is a child. Does this uniform alone make this child a doctor? No. As you would say, Latin American psychology would be the child, but it's cloaked in a doctor's uniform. It doesn't make him a doctor, though. And that's what Martin Baró is saying. He's saying, you know, Latin American psychologists are kind of in that stage right now. This cop is on his first day. Is he really considered a cop? Some would say yes. He would say yes because he went through the recruitment period and all that. But after time, a cop kind of develops his own idea of what the law is. You know, everyone has their own, you know, perception of it, and they apply it in different ways. And that's what Martin Baró is saying. Latin American psychologists, they really need to cultivate and find themselves in terms of psychology, and not just gain social status and borrow it from, say, the United States, which is viewed as a big brother. We need to come into our own and develop our own theories. And that's it. Thank you.
Tech support.
Good morning. My name is Jeanette Torres, and I'm also one of Professor Monique Shar's Site 22 students. I'm presenting on Magella Chisa and her ideas of how to revolutionize methods for research. So Magella Chisa is an associate professor who works out of the University of Botswana. She teaches graduate and undergraduate students like the methods of research and evaluation courses. One of her main areas of research is on research methodologies that are applicable and suitable for research conducted in those who are oppressed, do not have a voice of their own, or whom are simply discriminated upon. Magella Chalisa's writing suggests that in order for research conducted on a certain group of people and the data collected to be valid, the research methods used must be designed to take into consideration the people's backgrounds as well as their culturally complex communities in which they come from or currently live in. Basically, this just means that in order for you to conduct research in a group of people, you need their exact data, where they come from, what kind of background they have, what kind of community they live in. You can't conduct research on a group of inner city, let's say African American children, the same way you would conduct research on a group of, let's say, Caucasian children who live in the countryside. Chalisa is a champion for the underprivileged and for those who are discriminated upon. Her purpose is to help these people understand the impact research has in their community and in the communities they live in and their lives. Chalisa wants these people to acquire the knowledge that will empower their communities and improve their standards of living. Why is this important? A lot of research is done on inner city communities, and this is how they receive funding. If this research is inaccurate, then their funding, the funding that they will receive, will also be inaccurate. Her reasons for campaigning and advocating for these types of research methods is so that people understand that modern day research should not be conducted as it was done in the past, where a more Western European method was the correct method of research. Excuse me. So methodological imperialism, what is it? How does it affect research and its results? In her article on methodological imperialism, she touches on how biased the methods used to conduct research on other races and ethnicities truly is. Chalisa points to how these methods are not only incorrect, outdated, but how they also follow Western Euro ideology, an ideology which contends with the reality of the world we live in today. It's 2014. Things have changed a lot since these Euro Western ideas of what culture and of what a society is supposed to be like. So her methods, she explains, are more suitable than the research methods used today, which tend to mirror historically used methods that are designed to undoubtedly favor one group over the other, usually the dominant group. Chalisa uses the Porteous-Maze test, a test used to test the intelligence of Africans, as a clear example of the discriminatory methods of conducting research. When the test was used to test African children's impulsivity, impulsivity against white children's more sophisticated thought process. The African children would perform much better than the white children every time. This test proved that they were wrong. African children were not impulsive people. They actually took their time when presented with this test, and every time they made it out of the maze quicker than the white children. This type of test was used in the 20th century and was abandoned after the results were not what were expected, of course. For centuries, Africans had been depicted as these savages who needed to be civilized by their white counterparts. They were labeled as impulsive and subhuman. The test failed because the results went against these beliefs, the beliefs that whites were superior to Africans. Much has not changed. Many of the IQ tests we take today are extremely biased and culturally insensitive. Why is that important? Well, you take an IQ test, and if this IQ test is supposed to represent your intelligence and you fail this test, according to what the rules to passing this test are, not only destroys your self-esteem, but it may keep you from achieving the goals or entering the universities that you would want to. Many of these tests do not take into consideration that the norms of Euro-Western society are not necessarily the norms of the rest of the world, thus making it impossible for people of non-white descent to accurately be tested. So this is exactly what Galaxy is trying to explain to us. She's just saying, you know, when we do research, let's take into consideration that today and what is affecting this group of people right now today, where they're coming from, why they're in this situation, how did they get here, instead of just doing things as they did back in, let's say, the olden days.
Thank you.
All right, so